What is going on, Mad Hatters, and welcome back to the Madhouse. And today we've got the meta report from this past weekend, where we're not only looking at some lists that did really well, but what's more important about this meta report is we're looking at how the meta is developing. So why this matters is 2 weeks ago we saw a very triangle meta. We saw amber steel, blurple, and purple steel, and that was it. That was all the meta consisted of. And then last week we saw how blue green kind of came into the fray as the third most deck played and started making a lot of top 8s and top 4s and things like that. And so what we look at is what are the players that did really well this week doing differently to kind of combat the meta, to combat how blue-green has moved into play. Is blue-green, blue-green came into play because blue-green does really well against blurple. It's a great matchup, and it just doesn't get shut down. It has great resources and, things like that. And then it doesn't do bad against amber steel or purple steel either. So it was a great contender. So we're going to look at this week how blurple has really adjusted to that, and there's going to be something very similar in all the blurple lists that did really well this weekend. And then we're also going to look at blue-green, and you're going to see something very similar on how blue-green is developing, which I found really interesting. But yeah, and you'll see there's going to be some really interesting things on how people are attacking the new meta, and it's going to make DLC Bolognia very interesting, very, very interesting indeed. So I don't know, I think what's going to end up happening for DLC Bolognia, I'll make my prediction now before we get into the meta report, is that there's going to be a metric ton of aggro. I think right off the bat, it's going to be a blurple and aggro madhouse. I think that we'll just go with that, and I'll explain further why I think that. But let's get my noggin out of here. First, I have to talk about my home store, Safari Zone Collectibles, doing the 5K coming up October 4th. All right, you can scan the QR code, go to the link in the bottom. Going to be a great time. Everyone's going to have fun. They always do. Guaranteed 5K. But ladies and gentlemen, let's move into the actual list. And first up, we have the CornFlux event. It was 101 players, and top 8 was, lo and behold, 6 blurple players, 1 amber steel, and 1 green blue. And looking at the top 3, it was 2 blurples and 1 amber steel. And that's what we'll look at for this one, because there were some interesting things that I think are worth talking about. And so right off the bat, what we're going to see here with Denzel taking first place is Monstro. And you're going to see that in all of the blurple lists. I'm pretty sure every blurple list I show in this video that did really well this weekend was running Monstros in some form or another, whether it was 2 or 4. And then there was a couple on 3 as well. But Monstro's coming back. And the reason for that is because Monstro is really good into green blue. Like, Monstro is great into green blue. One of the hardest things for blurple to deal with is once green blue gets going, they start playing all these 5/5s that quest for 2, and then blurple just can't do anything back against them. Iago is a great option, being a 4/6, but it doesn't banish those 5/5s. Monstro, though, comes down, clears 2 characters, and it empties your hand, so their Clarabelle doesn't get value either. And Monstro could come down and could possibly take out more if they have, a bunch of 1-drops or 2-drops down. Then Monstro could clear all those and then clear those 5/5 characters. So Monstro is just really strong against green blue, and that's why you're going to see every blurple list. I believe every blurple list in this video is running Monstro now. Every blurple list that did really well, or almost every blurple list that did really well, is running Monstro. Now, looking at the rest of the deck, it's pretty normal. It's what we expect to see. The Dumbos, the Genies, Iagos. This one opted to run the Scrooge McDucks, which, again, just a great card. I believe Denzel called this his blurple tempo or tempo blurple, and that's what it is. It is a tempo deck. He is playing a strong card every single turn that is incredibly difficult to deal with. So one thing to note is Denzel has opted to cut out the 1-drops. So there's no the 1-drops outside of the Basil, of course. He's on he's no Rafikis, no Palace Guards, none of that. So that is something that's really interesting. A lot of these blurple decks are just super afraid of losing to aggro, so they run all these heavy 1-drops, but then that makes them really bad in into green blue. That makes them really bad into the mirror, like a mirror like this that is going to feast on those decks that are running all of those 1-drops. So with this deck, this is essentially saying screw the aggro. If I go against the aggro, even so, here's the thing with Blurple. Even when Blurple is teched for heavy aggro, Blurple still loses on the draw the majority of the time. It's just aggro just goes too fast. Like that's just the fact of the matter. I mean, when you're running Fire the Cannons in Amber Steel or Green Steel, then they just fire the cannons, your Rafiki, and now you're down a card in the meantime. And if your 2-drop is Tipo, now you're down a lot of the cards, and congratulations, you have a 1-2. So Denzel just opted to say, screw the aggro decks. I'm not running an awful card like Elephant. I'm not running awful cards like Rafiki. I'm going for this heavy tempo to beat the crap out of the mirror, to beat the crap out of green blue. And that's what he did. When we look at the top 8 again, Baja Blast, 1 aggro, 6 Blurple. And if you look at what took second place at this event, we've got Doug on another Blurple list. And his list, though, if you look at it, is much more set up for the aggro matchup. He's running the 3 Rafikis. He's running the 3 Madam M Elephants. Cards that aren't good into the Blurple mirror. So what happens is Denzel, on his turn 3, he can just slam down those Scrooge McDucks. And now Doug just can't do anything about that. Like, he could slam down an Iago, which could be great, and abuse the fact that Denzel doesn't have an hypnotic strength, but he is running Helping Hand. So the Helping Hand takes out the Iagos. But when you look at it, Doug just can't do anything if Denzel plays those Scrooge McDucks. So if he goes Scrooge McDuck into Scrooge McDuck, like, Doug is just, well, dead in the water, dead as a duck, right? So there's just not a lot going on. I mean, his saving grace would be Into the Unknown, but then you're ramping the Blurple mirror, and the Blurple mirror now is just going to abuse that free ink by doing whatever they need to do. One thing to note, neither one of these decks are on second star to the right, so dropping that heavy on Inkable, and also dropping the Shift Elsa. So again, dropping that heavy on Inkable, and I'm a huge fan of that. I personally think that's the way to go. The Shift Elsa can help against aggro if you live that long, but again, when you're a deck that's altering for 7, I just think that that's a great way to lose a lot of games. As you alter for 7, you might find your Sailor Tipo, and then you might find 3 high-cost Uninkables that now you're just living on a prayer, right? So I think this is the route to go. But we've seen those high cost uninkable decks do well. So that's, hey, to each their own. But I like where Blurple is going. I think this is the route they have to go in teching in these Monstros to beat up these green blue decks that are really coming in to abuse Blurple. So, looking at third place, though, we have Thomas taking Amber Steel to third in a deck that look at that. No Troubadour in this one. I was about to say something, and this is a homebrew of Thomas that is really neat. So it's very different. Because when you look at it, a couple things stand out immediately. We have 3 docks over 4. So on an uninkable count, we're at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 14. So only 14 uninkables, which is kind of unheard of in Amber Steel right now. All the Amber Steel aggro decks are really high in that uninkable count. Mine in particular, I'm running 18. I think that's kind of the average right now. So you do have to be, I don't even think I'm careful with my altar, to be honest. But with this deck, it is definitely safer with the altar. You're going, it is interesting to drop the Doc being such a huge card. There's this idea right now in the community that if Amber Steel just sees Doc, they just kind of win, and they're not exactly wrong. If Amber Steel is able to just slam down those cards, and they're able to slam down the Mulans to get through their hand, and then slam down the Doc to refill, like that's pretty tough to deal with. I mean, but looking at this deck, he's trying to use the Goofy, the 4-cost, opting to use the Goofy, which is one that we haven't seen this set, and we didn't see it much last set until a gentleman, I forget his name, made it work with mines and the Robin Hood that you could exert him to deal a damage to a character. So I'm curious how often Goofy's effect actually comes into play with this list, because most things in the meta just clear your characters right now. We've got Into the Unknown, Hades, Strength of a Raging Fire, Fire the Cannons. Like, those are going to clear the majority of your cards. So I'm curious if Goofy really did a whole lot for him. Really high on the 4-cost right here. So we've got 4, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 4-costs. So lots of ink in that area. So that is an interesting thing. But this one thing with this list is, you know, I'm curious. He definitely beat his top 8 opponent, right? And which is kind of impressive, because this deck, unless you draw the right cards, isn't going to go fast. You're losing a lot of those cards that help you go fast. That being that 4th Doc, the 4th Nala, the 4th Lady. So in a lot of the power plays as well, where you could go something like Aurora into Tiana, into Lady plus Nala, and that now Tiana can sing Strength to take out, you know, a 4 health character. So it is an interesting list, but it worked really well into a meta that maybe Thomas was a little bit favored, because something like, if I hadn't looked at all the Blurple lists, but maybe a lot of them had cut some of this aggro stuff. Maybe there wasn't a lot of elephants, but just another look at Amber Steel. And the fact of the matter is, Amber Steel's is just, it's just a powerful deck right now. Strength of a Raging Fire is extremely powerful card. Doc, Lady, Tiana, all great cards. Aurora letting you cheat out. Massive board, super early. All in all, just strong deck. So good job, Thomas. Next up on our list, we've got the Road to Lorcana. This is an ongoing series, and I thought this was really interesting. Look at this meta spread. Blurple, Green Blue, Purple Steel, Amber Steel, Blue Yellow, and Green Yellow. So a massive spread. One thing to note, though, is you're going to see that we got top 8, 2 green yellows aggro, Amber Steel aggro, blue yellow aggro. We've got 11 and 8 control decks or tempo decks with green, blue, and blurple, and only 1 and 2 made top 8. Green blue just did not do great. 11 of them, and it just goes to show that when aggro goes really fast, then you just don't have a way forward. And one thing to note with some of these green-blue decks is not all of them are on Baymax. And I'm a starch believer that Baymax is a must-have in green-blue right now. When aggro is so prevalent, I think if you're not running, you know, Baymax in there for that shiftable way to control those aggro players or to sing Under the Sea, then you run the risk of hyper aggro just beating you. And they don't even have to high roll. They can just normal roll you, play one card at a time, and by the time you get going, the game's just over. So huge staunch believer in that Baymax in here. But looking at the list, taking first place was Gadok with his version of green yellow, and a really unique version at that. Someone pointed this list out to me before I started working on the meta report, and I thought it was really interesting because we have this really heavy aggro approach. We have the Curse Merfolks, the Daisies, the Ladies, and then we have the normal package of like the Shift Lady, the 2 different kinds of tramps. But then we have the Circle of Life, and I thought the Circle of Life was just so interesting because I'm just curious how often it comes to life. You know, one thing that's really interesting is that Stitch there, and I think the high roll is getting that Stitch or the Clarabelle down, because if you get the Stitch down, you only need 2 characters to be able to draw 2 cards, and it's a 4/8. So if you get to play, you cheat out the Tramp, and you have at least 1 character still alive, you sing the Circle of Life to bring back the Stitch. Now you have a 4/8/2, and you get to draw 2 cards. And one of the toughest things for green yellow is the draw package. It doesn't really have a draw package outside of the Tramp that lets you draw cards when characters are banished. And then we have Clarabelle that if your opponent's hand is bigger, you can draw a card. And majority of the time it is, so you do get to draw that card. So now with Bobby and Yzma, you're essentially playing these cantrips that replace themselves, and you get to, it's not the same as a cantrip, but you can dig through your deck to find those key pieces to set up what you want. You have the Ursula that's just great into green blue. It's, being able to take out a You're Welcome or a Heads Held High, or even better, and Under the Sea. Then you can take on a lot of threats there. You have the Emerald Chromacon that is really good into purple steel, and green yellow suffers hard into purple steel, so Emerald Chromacon just kind of letting you gain some of that win percentage back in a good way. So I just thought the deck was really unique. It's very different than what we've been seeing. A lot of what we've been seeing in green yellow is the Under the Sea package with the Scrump, and essentially what happens with that list is you exert your character to give their character -2 strength, and then you sing Under the Sea and you clear their board, and then you can just quest freely. So, but this list opting to do it a little bit differently. They have, again, you have the ability to go extremely fast. You just slam down all of these cards. You cycle with Tramp, and you also have the ability to kind of go really fast, but refill your hand with things like Clarabelle and Stitch that you discarded and played again with Circle of Life. So I just thought it was really neat. I mean, even if you just play Clarabelle and then shift Clarabelle, that's another way to sing Circle of Life to get something back. There's just a lot of ways to utilize it, and I think this is a really interesting take on green yellow, and I really like it. I would not be surprised if we saw some more of this going forward, because it just has, it's a different kind of aggro deck, and I find it really intriguing. So really good job, really good job. Next up though, taking second place, blue yellow, Kodo Yosa taking second place with a blue yellow deck, and I think, wow, right? So blue yellow is not something that you expect to see taking a top 8 in this meta. But again, when you see the meta is 11 green blues and 8 blurples, how do you abuse that local meta? You go fast. And this is one way to do it. And you go fast with cards that remove their best way of carrying them, that being Under the Sea. So now you're running Ursula, which you take away their Inkables, and you run Ludwig Drake, take away their Inkables, or you just take away their Under the Sea. It's a great thing going on. And then meanwhile, you have Ward, you have Ward, and then give all your characters Ward. So that's really good as well, because now they can't Into the Unknown you, they can't You're Welcome, Mother's Knows Best, they can't Hades, they can't Elsa. One of the biggest threats for Blurple and Purple Steel being that Elsa into Belle, and they can't do that anymore. So you can understand why blue yellow is going to do really well into a meta that is heavily dominated by Blurple and green blue. And again, it also just, you can run decks like this when you see Purple Steel kind of slowing down and disappearing. We haven't seen Purple Steel doing really well, so it gives room for decks like this with the low health characters to come in and just say goodnight, like really quickly. I thought it was interesting to see 4 Darling Deers. That's the 4/4 quest for 1. When you play this character, a chosen character gets +2 lore this turn. So that can be really dangerous if you play, if you play the Alice that's giving a character +1 lore. Next thing you know, your Anna, like this Anna, the 2-cost Anna up here, quest for 2, quest for +1 with Alice. So now she's questing for 3 and then questing for 5. And that is dangerous. Like, that is game over at that point. If she quested and then quested again, that's game over. Anna just won you the game. And that is really neat as well. Kita just being another ward character, but also letting you, like, the nice thing is this deck doesn't have a lot of draw power, but if you can create free ink, then that's essentially draw power. So Kita, while not drawing you a card, is kind of doing the same thing, because you now get to put a card from the top of your deck into your inkwell instead of having to ink a card that you draw. Sven doing the same thing. It now, instead of needing to draw another character because your character is going to get banished, Sven just readies your character so they can't be banished with a challenge, and that's kind of a pseudo draw as well. So really neat deck, really cool to see it do so well and to kind of have an understanding of what the local meta would be. And this is why, like, this deck and this green yellow deck are perfect examples of why it matters so much to study your local meta and to just really go in and show people that, like, you have to be prepared for anything. So next up, we have Friends and Foes. It's a 42-player event. Looking at the list, we got 4 Purple Steel, and this is a first. We haven't seen something like this in a little while, where Purple Steel just doing so well in an event. And then we have 1 Blurple, 1 Blue Steel, 2 Green Blues. So I believe this event, they split top 8, so that is important. So we don't really have a first place player, but I did want to look at one of the green blues. This is the first green blue we'll look at in this video. And one thing to note, and I've kind of mentioned it, is that Baymax is kind of turning into a must-have, because these aggro decks are starting to pop up to beat Blurple, to beat Green Blue, and Baymax is really Green Blue's best way to beat those aggro decks. Because if you can go Baymax and then you do something and then you go into John Silver, there's nothing that aggro can do at that point. You slowed them down just enough with Baymax, and then John Silver comes in and then prevents them from questing for the rest of time. And now they lose at 12 to 18 lore, and it's good night. So that being really, really effective. So Baymax, just a great card. The other thing is, if you go Tipo in, like if you play a 1-drop and then you go Tipo and then you go Baymax, you can now sing Under the Sea on turn 3. And that could be the whole thing. If you're on the draw, then your opponent just lost the game if you cleared their whole board. Like, there's no coming back from that at that point, because now you're able to still quest with, like, going forward, and you're creating a board and all those different things. So meanwhile, we don't just have to rely on Baymax, because this deck is also running Pleekly. So what can happen now is you go heavy ramp, you go Pleekly to get to that John Silver to slow down your opponent that way. So not quite as good as Baymax by controlling the board immediately, but John Silver definitely helping, because at least they can't quest, right? So that is really helpful. But the other thing that Captain Dave did here is you'll see that a lot of blue-green decks are starting to run Hades again. We didn't see much Hades in the first iterations of the deck, but now I think every green-blue list that made top 8 except for 1 was running Hades in some form or another. And again, when we saw blue-green come from out of nowhere, Hades into the mirror is really good. Like, it easily clears one of their 5/5 characters or 5/6 character, and like the big cow, it quests for 2. It's hard to get rid of. You can't just bounce it back to their hand, because then they replay it. So you have this awful time of having to bounce it to their hand and play Bend to My Will in the same turn. So Hades just coming back because it's so good into the mirror. And Captain Dave showing that, he did really well, made top 8. It would have been interesting to see who would have won the event with so many Purple Steels in top 8. Remember, Purple Steel, still a tough matchup for Green Blue. If you think you're in a very heavy Green Blue meta, Purple Steel is probably the way to go, or just hyper aggro in general. But really good showing by Captain Dave. He opted to run 4 Under the Seas. Again, if you're really worried about aggro, maybe that's the way to go forward, because Under the Sea is really one of your best answers to answering those aggro decks. And it's just not bad against those other Blurple decks when you have head held high. I'm not a fan of 4. It's just too many uninkables. But if you're running too many high cost uninkables, but if you're running Bobbies, then it's a little bit easier to stomach doing that, because Bobby can kind of filter out your hand in the beginning. So really good job. Next up, we do have a lot with a Purple Steel list making top 8. And one thing to note with this Purple Steel list is that you're seeing Pete again. When I looked at this event, there were 4 Purple Steels in top 8. 2 of them were on Pete and 2 of them were not. So it would have been interesting to see what the outcome was, because on the draw, those Pete decks are going to run a little bit smoother into the mirror, because they can go Pete and then seeing Strength of a Raging Fire on the next turn. And a lot of the times in these Purple Steel mirrors, it's whoever gets off Strength of the Raging Fire first. Meanwhile, looking at the rest of the list, you have the Palace Guard Vanish character with the giant Giant Cobra, and then you also have the Treasure Guardian. So you have that Vanish package that you're looking to utilize to draw that card with Treasure Guardian. You'll note that a lot of times we see Raja in this. She's the 3/3 tiger that quests for 1. I believe she's cost 2 inkable. But opting to not go that route, instead go, trading her out for some other things. So we have our 1 costs with the Diablos and the Captain Hooks. We have the tried and true Calhouns and Docks. Genie just being extremely difficult for Blurple to deal with, because now you have this 3/4 that you can't do anything with Dumbo now, and you have to be worried about the fact that they might run Genie, or they run the 2/3/2 that gives them Challenger +2, or the Jafar for that matter. And then you have Fire the Cannons just to blow up your opponent's 1-drops or things like that. You blow up the Amber Steel's Aurora, Blue Green's Shift targets. So I like this direction for Purple Steel. I'm a big fan of this. I think that it just has the tools you need. Pete is just so good into so good into Baja Blast. It's so good into the Mirror. It's really good into Amber Steel. And I think that it's one reason that we didn't see Purple Steel doing so well for a while is because people started getting kind of greedy and going away from Pete and testing these other things. So I think if we see Purple Steel do really well at Bolognia, then it's probably going to be lists that do run Pete, but we'll see. Next up, though, we have Top Cut Games with 60 players, and looking at it, Baja Blast, Green Blue coming in with 3, making top 8, Blue Steel taking 1, Blurple with 2, and Purple Steel with 1. And going with first place, we have Michael with his version of Green Blue. Looking at this list, it is very reminiscent of Zan Saeed's and Jeremy's Green Blue list. Yeah, it might be almost identical. I just don't remember if their list was running Louis, the alligator. That alligator, of course, being a 4/3/1, it enters play exerted, and when you play this character, chosen opposing character gains reckless during their next turn. So Louis being really good into that aggro matchup. So Michael, his list is ready to just decimate aggro. He's got the Louis, he's got the 4 shift Baymaxes, he's got the shift Basil that can come down as well. So now they have to blow up that Basil, they have to blow up Tipo, because Basil and Baymax could come down to really just mess their day up. Basil being able to clear out anything that Amber Steel is going to play. So really dangerous card there. We're also opting to run the 4 Under the Seas and the 2 heads held high. So again, great cards to kind of edge into that mirror match. So this list, though, also running the 4 Scrooge McDucks. So just you have this ability to really control aggro lists, but then when we look at it, we're 3, 7, 8, 9, 13, 17, 21 plus 4, 25 cards that are questing for 2. So I mean, 25, 50, so almost, we'll just say almost half your deck is able to quest for 2, which is pretty good. Meanwhile, the rest of your deck is letting that happen. They're getting you ready to do that. They're searching for it. They're controlling the board. So this deck just doing really well. And then when you look at second place, second place, I don't remember now. I think second place was another Green Blue list that was on the Hades list. So, but looking at what I wanted to showcase was Luke running 4th place with his Blurple list. And I wanted to highlight this because it does show that we still have decks that are making top 8 with the high cost uninkables, that being the 7 Hades, the 2 Shift Elsas, the 2 Second Stars to the right. This list opting to go really heavy into aggro. You have the Basil plus Rafikis plus Tipos into the Hypnotic Strengths to be able to clear, most of anything. You have the Madam Mim Elephants to help against aggro. And then Shift Elsa is good into those heavy aggro matches. The problem being that, again, when you run a package like this, if you run into a Blurple list that is set lower to the ground, running those Scrooge McDucks, you might run into a lot of trouble. They don't care about your Madam Mim Elephants, that you lost questing power to play. They don't, those are not the best top decks unless you get high enough ink that you can start doing things like play a Hades and bounce your Hades with Madam Mim Elephant. So there is that. But the resource game with a list like this is phenomenal. You have the draw from second star to the right, which can just outright win you games when you have the time to be able to sing with all those characters. And oftentimes you do. You only need to go Tipo into Genie into Iago to be able to sing second star to the right on, what is that, turn 5, I think. So there is that as well. So again, there isn't a blurple list that you have to run to do well. You can run a version like this that does really good into hyper aggro and be fine, but it also does really good into 3 green blues, 2 blurples. But they did, I believe, to top 4 was green blue, blurple, blurple, if I remember correctly. So there is that. And again, when you're running a list like this, you have a lot more bad top decks into green blue, where green blue can just essentially out-resource you when they run 25 cards that quest for 2, and half of your deck doesn't, I mean, they quest for 1. So if we look at this, we've got 3, I mean, what can count the questing for more than 2? 2, 6, 10, 14. 14 cards in this list that are questing for at least 2. So there's that as well. So just things to consider. What does your local meta look like? What do you expect to see if you're going to Bolognia that you would rather not lose against? You know, if you hate losing to aggro, then maybe you run a list like this. But I can also promise you that running a lot of Amber Steel aggro, I don't really care if my opponent gets an elephant down. I'm just going to go under your elephant and still win. So there's a lot to consider. But moving on, we have the Diet Coke, this being the 79-player event. This is the top 8. A couple interesting things here. You've got green-blue, 1, with the blurple, 3. But you guys can see that. What I found really interesting, the top 8 for the Diet Coke event, you had 1 making top 8 with 11 green-blue players. You had 3 blurples with 17 total at the event. And Amber Steel, though, if you look towards the bottom, 13 at the event, none of them making top cut. So I found that really interesting. So when we go forward to look at first place, no, they split top 4. So when we look at the decks that did really well at this event, we got Matthew here on his version of Blurple, and his version of Blurple is a little bit all over the place. So you'll notice I mentioned every Blurple list that did really well except for 1 was running Monstro, and so we just saw that, and here's another list that's on that Monstro capability to really beat up those green-blue players, but also opting to run that strong draw with second star to the right, and then also opting to run the Shift Elsa that it can just close out those aggro games, but we still have the heavy aggro package with Rafiki plus Basil, and then also the Madam Mim Elephant and Hypnotic Strength. So again, what works for you? Do you like having those heavy high cost uninkables? If you don't mind, then maybe you can still fit in those cards while still, running the Monstros. I think when we're seeing so much green blue, Monstro becomes a really important card in your list because it's such an easy way to answer green blue. And I can tell you from experience, when we start getting to that ink level, that is the card I'm playing around. I'm not playing around anything else against Blurple. I'm playing around only Monstro. How can I utilize what I have in my hand and on the board to play around Monstro the best that I'm assuming is going to be coming down? And because it's just so effective at clearing so many different things. So something to keep in mind. And then we have Matt taking top 8 with green steel, and a rather unique green steel list at that. When we look at it, there's a lot of cards in here that are going to be effective into what our meta is right now. You have the Calhoun and the Captain Hook, really good against the Chernodogs decks. So of course, they don't run Chernobogs anymore, but really good against the dog decks, green-yellow right now. Captain Hook and Calhoun, really good against the against the Amber Steel aggro decks as well. You have the amazing draw from Doc. You have Ursula that is great into green blue. It's great into purple steel to snipe that Strength of a Raging Fire. And then you have the heavy draw package from the Clarabelle. So you're running the 4/4/4 shift package, so you can almost always try and get that shift package down. But meanwhile, we're running a couple other interesting things in the form of the Max Goof shift package. And I think this is really neat. So the Max Goof, the 2/2/1, the 3 cost, the baby shift. When you play this character, you pay 1 ink to return a song card with cost 3 or less from your discard to your hand. So Max Goof isn't a turn 3 card the majority of the time. What you're trying to do with Max Goof is on turn 3, you play something like Lawrence, then you can sing Strength of a Raging Fire, and then on turn 4, you sing Strength of a Raging Fire, then you play Max Goof to return Strength of a Raging Fire to your hand for 4 ink, and then next turn, you can do something like Lawrence seeing Strength of a Raging Fire again, and then you shift Max Goof and you quest, and then you get Strength of a Raging Fire to take out something else. So the shift package being costing 4/5/2, whenever this character quests, you may play a song card with cost 4 or less from your discard for free. Then put it on the bottom of your deck instead of in your discard. So you can do a lot of really neat things. Max Goof has to be answered. When your opponent plays that, you have to have Fire the Cannons to be able to remove that Max Goof. And you don't really want to bounce it either, because then they just keep getting Strength of a Raging Fire. Meanwhile, Strength of a Raging Fire is not your only threat. You also have Mother Knows Best, which is another great card against aggro or these green-blue decks that are trying to get their Clarabelle down. And then Emerald Chromicon, we've seen how good that card can be against these heavy challenge metas where they're just trying to banish your characters. So Emerald Chromicon comes down, helps against the Blurple matchup, the Purple Steel, the Amber Steel. If they want to sing Strength of a Raging Fire, then they have to know that something is now getting bounced, and they have to play around that. So Emerald Chromicon, one of its most powerful effects isn't on the card. What its most powerful effect is your opponent just starts playing weird, because now there's these mind games. What are they going to bounce back to my hand? Or are they going to bounce something back to their hand? And so they're just like, well, you know what? I'm going to quest with this character, and then I'm going to sing Strength of Raging Fire with this character because I expect them to bounce this card. And then they just don't. They do something completely different, and it just screws up everything. So that card, the mind games that it does, is just so powerful for the deck. So I thought it was a really neat list. One, we saw LD. He does the podcast, I believe, with Artabax, showcase one of his Green Steel lists. I think Green Steel, it still suffers against Blurple really hard, so I think it's really tough to say this is the deck to run. But if you're in a local meta that doesn't have a lot of Blurple, I think that Green Steel is the deck to run. It just does so well into the rest of the meta, but Blurple just has so many resources that it's hard to make a good argument in that to go that route. But that's going to be all the lists for this video. Again, the things to point out from the meta this past weekend is that decks are adapting. All right, and you need to be aware, right? We see Blurple going back to the Monstro because the Monstro is so good against green blue. We see green blue going heavy into these Hades. So how can you, in your local meta, if you're going to Bolognia, how can you abuse that? Are you going to play this game of trying to assume that the lists are going to go this greedy route? Blue-green running Hades, is it going a more greedy route? Blurple going away from the 1-cost challenge is them going a greedier route, so they can try and stay in step with green-blue. So now is it time, when you go to Bolognia, are they going to be greedy still? And is that your time to run the heavy aggro list, like maybe the blue-green or not blue-green, but the blue-yellow that's really fast and a lot of ward characters, or the green-yellow with Circle of Life and Chromicon and the questing for 2 characters? So there's just a lot of things to think about, and I hope these videos help you look at and see how the meta is developing. One thing to note that I didn't is a lot of these events were in the EU, so this is a look at what the meta is going to be like for Bologna, and I think that we're going to see a metric ton of aggro. I think we're going to see more aggro in Bologna than we've ever seen at any other DLC event, because I think now is the time to do it. That, ladies and gentlemen, remember, regardless of what happens with the meta or how it goes, thanks for watching. And remember, stay happy and healthy. That's what it's all about.